anchored in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday here on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube at the American Radicals Podcast. You can find us every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time is when we stream live to you. But if you're at a different time, that doesn't mean you can't always just catch up and watch us after the fact. You can also catch the audio format of the show on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, and across all those different platforms. Make sure you do all the things. I don't care if it's liking or thumbs upping or subscribing or following or sharing. All of those things, do all the things, and then just do a little bit of your own sort of sharing and tell a friend or 12 about the American Radicals Podcast, as we're endeavoring on this hobbyist podcast to try to grow and expand the brand outwards, radicalizing more Americans to our way of thinking, which is a commonsensical way of thinking. But I had to issue the qualifier, as always, that this is, in fact, a hobbyist podcast, not representing any particular agency, department, bureau of the federal government of the United States of America, just an American citizen here exercising his First Amendment rights to comment on things in the news, open source information, not revealing anything that's classified. And today's going to be pretty heavy on the press release side. We're going to the oldie but goodie. It's been a while. If you've been a long-time listener or viewer of the American Radicals Podcast, today we're going to be talking about letting cops be cops by evaluating a lot of the press releases that come out from the Department of Justice that come to my attention, actually, because the FBI likes to share them on its social media pages. If you're a user of X, you will know that the FBI, the various 55 field offices around the country, have their own X accounts, and they will put out news releases and recruiting and attaboys, acknowledgments of fallen officers, or even acknowledgments of holidays. But I like to kind of peruse through them and see them. And I've gotten kind of good over the years of analyzing them based on the headlines. So I've dug through, I've pulled out, I believe, 18 different stories. We'll see if the voice holds up to it. I think I'm across the hump here on the RFK Jr. imitation voice that comes from the seasonal allergies. But you never know, maybe it'll weaken as we go. But 18 of them that I want to sort of get to, and also offer a little bit of analysis after the fact, because there's going to be a continued theme here that so many of these press releases where your federal law enforcement apparatus that you fund as a taxpayer to the tune of $11 billion a year is kind of taking credit for work that it's not doing. And I think that that money could be diverted into better uses of it. And particularly if we're going to be reprioritizing how we attack crime at a federal level in this country. We've heard a refrain this year since the incoming Trump administration that they really want to focus in on addressing violent crime. Well, I don't have a problem with that. I think the American people knew that going into it when they sent the mandate last November when they elected Donald Trump to come back into office as the president. There were problems. There were reporting problems, despite the Biden administration's attempts to say that, well, violent crime is down. Well, 30% of police departments, including all the big ones like New York and Chicago and Houston and Los Angeles, weren't giving you any information. So that data wasn't very good. And I think there was a sentiment around the country that violent crime was out of control, and the Trump administration wanted to come in and prioritize that. I think, though, the tack that they have taken could be optimized. So I'll give some recommendations at the end. But before we get to all of that, let's make sure that we thank our underwriting sponsor of the day on the AmRad Pod. It's not really a sponsor, it's an affiliate. We don't take any money. We just like to support American businesses here. So let's support this one, which is the OG affiliate of the American Radicals Podcast. That's the True Earth Pharmacy. Everybody should go to trueearth.co, trueearth.co. You don't need the M. Don't get confused on the double E in the middle. Trueearth.co. if you happen to be doing some planting, you have a homestead, or if you want to get personally healthy, they have fertilizers and personal supplements. Very vertically integrated company, comes out of Georgia. They use the fertilizers to grow the supplements. It's all in-house. And Claude, the CEO, the mad scientist, the founder over there, loves getting the outreach from the American Radicals podcast audience who has some questions about what would be best for their situation. I can tell you personally, I am not a good responder to just about any supplements out there, except what the True Earth Pharmacy has actually provided. And that would be the black turmeric and the turmeric trio. Had some inflammation from doing all the miles of running that I do every single morning. It was definitely impacting me, and this changed my life. We're talking 5 days, maybe 6 days of taking a turmeric trio or black turmeric supplement, just a single eyedropper down the hatch, and the pain went away. It's truly amazing. I encourage everybody to check it out, trueearth.co, and you can save a little bit of money. You can use our proprietary code, which is AMRAD25, and then I'll get you a 10% off discount. So be sure to check them out, trueearth.co. And we can begin the rundown of the press releases. And it's been a while since we've done this, so I've been able to aggregate them, but these were relatively recent, within the last few months that they've come out. I wasn't digging back into the archives, but many of these cases are years old, which is increasingly a problem, as we'll address. So the first one that I found, we can bring it up, comes from the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of New York. And our bad guy here, his name is Brent Trimble, and he was engaging in some pretty egregious stuff. So if you got young ones in here, maybe you want to do earmuffs right off the bat, but we'll give it to you nonetheless. The complaint alleges that Brent exchanged sexually explicit images with a child, a female, including messages persuading her to create and send him videos of herself doing some naughty things to herself. So now what Brent has done is encouraged a minor to create child pornography, or as it's called at the federal level, child sexual abuse material. CSAM is the acronym. Now, according to the complaint here in the press release, our bad guy, Brent, also had sexual contact with the victim. So now we have a hands-on offense. Now, from personal experience, this is relatively common, unfortunately, and tragically, and it depends on the state where it happens. This happened in New York, which might have necessitated a partnership with the feds. I don't know too much about it, but I was able to dig up a little bit, which gave away the game, because Brent Trimble, was first charged by state authorities with state offenses, but then he was released on bail because in New York, they are down for the kiddie pedophiles going out and continuing to abuse minor children. And this is where the partnership actually does pay off. Well, if he had been in Florida, he might have been charged federally, he might have been charged state, because in state, if a hands-on offense happens, that's technically a capital murder case, not so much in New York. My problem here is that he was actually investigated and charged by the local authorities, and the FBI didn't put that out there. They just came in and adopted it after the fact. Now, the partnership is noteworthy. I think it's should be something that we should laud, how you have this relationship between the federal partners and the state partners, because the state sucks and they let a pedophile out on the loose and the feds had to come in and get him back into custody. But at the same time, that wasn't acknowledged here. So it made it look like the feds were on him the entire time. And I think that sort of does a disservice to the police officers or sheriff's deputies who actually conducted the investigation. The FBI didn't do that. They just took the file over to a federal prosecutor, which I think we will have a remedy for if you follow through with us all the way to the end when we get to some recommendations. That one doesn't necessarily constitute a dunk. It isn't necessarily something that we want to interrupt. We do want to have those partnerships out there. I just don't like how the feds take credit, which is a bugaboo for the locals and increasingly causes a lot of static between your state authorities, your local authorities, and the feds, because they say, hey, you guys steal credit for our work. Don't give us anything out of it. And the feds say, oh, well, that's just too bad for you. You don't have an $11 billion agency with its own public affairs office that puts this out there, its own social media team, and getting all the comments online about how they're doing all the good work. They're being the good cops, doing all that cop work. Let's pivot over now to Indiana. This comes from the Southern District of Indiana. And our bad guys here, there's two of them. His names are Richard Garner and Andres Hernandez Alamar. He's got a hyphenated Latino name. And there's a couple of notes here. Now, the incident in question happened, actually, it's not an incident, it's two incidents, and they commingled it onto one press release to make themselves look awesome because these partners in crime aren't actually partners in crime. They're two individuals who just happen to engage in activities that crossed over each other. The headline, though, is deceiving. Cracking down on fentanyl, two Indianapolis dealers sentenced to federal prison. They're dealing fentanyl, not together. So our first bad guy, his name is Richard Garner. August 8th, 2024, which would be the Biden administration, the Merrick Garland Department of Justice, the Christopher Wray FBI, Indianapolis Metro police officers initiated a traffic stop, and this guy ran a red light. He ignored the police. He fled. This was a high rate of speed vehicle pursuit through Indianapolis. Winds up going into a suburban area. He threw a gun out of the car and eventually got caught in a traffic jam. Officers searched his vehicle. They found a bunch of fentanyl and cocaine and cash. So when you got guns, drugs, and cash, that kind of sounds like a career case for those Indianapolis Metro Police Department officers, but they're not going to get the credit here, according to the Department of Justice. The same day, investigators also searched his house and found more drugs, including fentanyl and cocaine and scales, and they also found more guns and ammunition and conversion devices to make the guns into automatics, and also a bunch of cash. And the feds did what now on this Mr. Garner case? Again, this happened in August, so over a year ago at a local level. The search warrant wasn't a federal warrant. It was all spun off of a traffic stop, as it often is. I mean, Timothy McVeigh was apprehended. That was the Oklahoma City, according to the federal resources on that one. The lone actor for the Oklahoma City bombing, will take that one as it is. He was apprehended by a sheriff's deputy, pulled him over for a traffic violation. It happens a lot. There's this refrain within local policing, and it's a self-deprecating refrain. You're asked, what do you do for the department, for the agency, for the sheriff's office? And you say, oh, I just work patrol. Just patrol. Patrol is responsible for a lot. It's not just the first responder. It's not just the guys that are there, happen to be there when the crime is happening most often. I mean, the detectives are working out of an office. They're very rarely out and about unless they're doing specific follow-up investigations and interviews and collecting evidence. They're very rarely there when the seconds count. The most likely person that you're going to interface with out of a law enforcement agency at a local or state level is just patrol. And here, they did their jobs and wound up getting a big bust out of it. And the Department of Justice and the FBI out of the Indianapolis field office was happy to take credit for that. No acknowledgement at all. And the second part here from the exact same press release is this other individual, because the FBI is very happy to take credit from locals as well as other federal agencies. Now, according to these documents on our second bad guy, it is from May of 2022, before the midterm elections under the Biden administration. Your bad guy again, Andres Hernandez Alamar. You had the Indianapolis Police Department detectives. They were alerted by U.S. Postal Services that they found a bunch of fentanyl in a package. So you've got U.S. Postal Service, which is a federal entity, and back to, again, the Indianapolis Metro Police Department. Their detectives got the alert because of the relationship that they do have with the federal entities, that the Postal Service had intercepted a package. It had a whole bunch of fentanyl in there, and it had an address tied to it. So the investigators went out there, searched this guy's phone, and connected him to a Mexican drug cartel and arrested him. And that was back in 2022. So this press release comes over 3 years hence. FBI, completely uninvolved, took the file over to a federal prosecutor. I don't even know if they did that. They might have just needed somebody to be the affiant on it. And now taking credit Job well done. Congratulations, everybody. That's a career case for you. And maybe you can put it on your FD 954 and promote on up the chain. So next time that there's an opening to run a squad on drugs or violent crime, you can be the boss. All right, we can go to Connecticut now. The District of Connecticut. The headline is Waterbury men charged with committing violent crimes culminating in the shooting of a Waterbury detective. So these guys shot a cop. There are three of them. The three's name are Sidney Reed, Alberto Rodriguez, Ariane Perez Feliciano. The names aren't really that big of a deal, but I do want to make sure that I'm accurate here. This happened this year, January 13th, just before the Trump administration came in. You have two of the bad guys, Rodriguez and Reed. They pointed a firearm at someone's face and stole his shotgun and his drugs and his cash because they ripped off another drug dealer. That's just the cost of doing business much of the time. And then a month later, now into the Trump administration, February 13th, all three of our bad guys attempted to commit an armed carjacking on the streets. A short time later, they committed another carjacking. And then when the police got involved, they fled and fired upon the officers. So this entire ordeal happened in February with the three bad guys, which would mean that it was 9 months ago by the local police. The local police identified them, engaged with them in a chase, took rounds, and the feds get the credit for it. I don't think the FBI has marked patrol cars outside of the FBI police, which do security. They weren't involved in this chase at all. But the headline there is the FBI was responsible for putting these cop killers or would-be, wannabe cop killers in custody when it was really just the local guys, local patrol out of Waterbury, Connecticut, handling business. Let's let cops be cops and handle their business. We can go now to Maryland, the District of Maryland, and everything bad seems to happen out of Baltimore, so kind of can assume that that is going to be a connection. And it is here. Baltimore recidivist sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for possession of firearm and ammunition by convicted felon. So recidivist going back to the pokey because he can't just seem to avoid staying afoul of the law. This one is pretty in-depth. I had to do actually a little bit of extra research on it because it just didn't make sense. That's a pretty long headline. Recidivist means that he's had some prior interactions with law enforcement. He's gone to the pokey before. Our bad guy here, his name is Ethan King, and he pled guilty that on February 7th, 2024, a year and a half ago, during the last presidential administration, law enforcement, i.e. just patrol, i.e. cops, observed on surveillance video that he was at a convenience store, and inside the store, he had a handgun and had an extended magazine with a conversion kit and no further information. That's it. Well, he's a convicted felon, so that is a federal crime, but it just didn't pass the smell test for me. It seems like something else was afoot. Why would they be looking at surveillance footage? Did the clerk running the counter there say, hey, this guy came in and he had a gun and you should probably look at it, and then through facial recognition or just awareness of who this individual was, they were able to tie the surveillance footage to this guy? That didn't make a whole lot of sense. I needed to do a little bit more research, which I did. So I went to baltimorewitness.org to get more information, because this doesn't just fall into the lap of an investigator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They actually had to do a little bit of work. And by that, I mean they just read the newspaper. So from baltimorewitness.org, first headline, strong evidence that teenager conspired to commit murder, says the prosecution. Wait, this guy's getting prosecuted by Baltimore authorities, by local prosecutors? So he's already in custody. And then the next joining piece, same resource, baltimorewitness.org. Attempted murder defendant sentenced to 35 years as public safety threat. Now, what we learn from these two pieces from baltimorewitness.org is that a circuit court judge sentenced Ethan King to life in prison. and suspended all but 35 years. So basically gave him a life sentence, but we're going to throw out life sentence and just give you 35 years. He was found guilty of attempted murder because he did a drive-by shooting, which probably sent the real cops over there to address. Ethan King also received the same sentence for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, as well as 10 years for other firearms-related offenses, because there's some firearms-related problems in Maryland. He's a convicted felon. He's going to serve 35 years for these state crimes. Well, that doesn't make sense. Again, like, why are we going back, and I'll throw it up there, to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland? They're claiming that this guy got 8 years in federal prison. So after this case was fully investigated, fully adjudicated, convicted, and sentenced at trial, he got 35 years in a state penitentiary. After all of that, the feds came in and took the file and said, we think we got a federal crime too. So they could get him convicted and sentenced to easier time, because it's largely known that Fed time is easier than state time. So of the 35 years that he's going to have to do, a quarter of it will now be spent at Club Fed, easier time. And they said, hey, why don't you just plead guilty to this one? We'll have it most likely run concurrently with your state sentence. We'll just subtract that 8 years of time, and you can hang out Club Fed and do easier prison sentence as long as we get a nice headline. No reference in the press release at all to the BaltimoreWitness.org and how this came to their awareness. I actually had to do a little bit of research and find out this guy was doing a shooting and was already arrested by local authorities. But the feds came in, gave themselves lots of helmet stickers, lots of accolades, lots of congratulations. And meanwhile, this guy was already locked up and safe. The danger had already passed. We can go down to Texas now. Southern District of Texas. Headline is 30-year sentence imposed for producing sexual abuse material of a 7-year-old child. So if you got young ones, you happen to be watching the AMRAD pod with them, maybe earmuff here for the next 2 to 3 minutes as we dig into this one. There are 2 bad guys here. It's a couple, Luis and Jessica. And the investigation here began in 2023, more than 2 years ago. It was revealed that these 2 had perpetuated a sexual abuse of a child, which there was hands-on offenses, and which they videoed it. And apparently, later on, where I was able to dig in, hell hath no scorn. This is from valleycentral.com, a NBC local affiliate from this area. The headline is, Edinburgh couple film perform sex acts on young girls. And I can bring that down. No need to belabor the visual. But as it came to pass, apparently they must have had this couple, this loving couple, which was mutually abusing a 7-year-old girl together and filming it. They must have had some lover spat, some falling out, because the female, Jessica, went to local police. And according to this piece, she went to Edinburgh police and also wound up implicating herself because she wanted to get him in prison so badly. So she came in, probably presented a partial truth of what he was doing, saying, hey, my ex-boyfriend or current boyfriend or whatever their relationship status was, is harming this child. And then the investigators, because they're good investigators and good local cops, they interrogated her and found out that she was actually part of the problem the entire time. And they brought those charges. But once it's already done and wrapped up, they took it to the feds, or the feds came in. We don't know. But the federal pursuit was going to bear more fruit because the sentencing for creation of child sexual abuse material is very strong. And we don't know what the Arizona laws are on it. But this was out of Texas. So they were able to secure the conviction and the sentencing and wound up getting 30 years, which should roughly go with at least 2 images. I mean, 15 years is generally the sentence. If you create child sexual abuse material, you could be on the hook for 15 years. I think these 2, with the hands-on offense being an aggravating circumstance, they probably created videos. They wound up getting it. My question ultimately goes back to, those investigators who handled this, who actually did the interrogation, were able to elicit from the female side, the woman who was engaged in the abuse of the child here, that she in fact was involved as well. Why weren't they able to walk into the United States Attorney's office and bring some charges? And it'll flow through the recommendations that I have at the end here about how we might be able to optimize the way that we address violent crime and abuse of children. But before that, let's go over to Washington State, the Eastern District of Washington State. The headline here, and I don't know how to pronounce this, it's Topanish. He's a guy sentenced to more than 16 years in federal prison for shooting at law enforcement. Well, that's a good thing. Let's find out about the trials and tribulations of Leland Viharo. This happened in February 2024, more than a year and a half ago. He broke into his brother's home and stole 13 guns. Then, a couple days later, law enforcement officers responded to a report of gunfire coming from his vehicle. They did a traffic stop, so this was just patrol. Traffic stopped our bad guy, Viharo's vehicle. During the stop, he fled and he barricaded himself inside a nearby house. Law enforcement does what it's supposed to do there. They follow their training, they follow their protocols and procedures, and they set up a perimeter. And that's when you have the option to call in a hostage negotiator. Maybe you're going to get the SWAT team out there, whatever the best thing is. This guy winds up then going into the backyard and just firing off rounds. A couple rounds hit, not the police officers, thank goodness, hit the patrol cars, damaged the patrol cars. The officers were properly getting their cover behind it and were not struck by the rounds. But then the guy turns himself in. He realizes he might be out of ammo for all we know. He ultimately retreated to a different house, and a couple hours later, they waited him out, and he winds up surrendering. Again, I'm waiting to find out where the feds were on this one. He's going to go to prison for the 16 years, and there had to be a federal nexus here. It's not just shooting at a cop as a federal crime. It's normally a federally sworn cop. I've had that sort of thing happen here to myself, where an individual tried to strike a Native American police officer working for a tribal police department, but because he had federal deputization to a certain extent, he had training, we were able to bring a federal charge against the individual. And interestingly enough, that person was involved in a vehicle pursuit, which never should have happened. He was just kind of dealing with some depression issues, and police went up to him because they were concerned, doing a welfare check, and he just sped off. And the police kind of freaked out and said, he tried to hit us. And not really, but winds up being spun up into a giant vehicle pursuit involving 2 tribal police departments, 2 sheriff's departments, and then they called in the FBI. The guy barricaded himself in a vehicle, which he flipped over because he lost control, and we wound up sitting out there waiting for him and trying to determine our best course of action. And that's when you have the partnerships. It led to actually enhanced liaisoning between state authorities and federal authorities and tribal authorities. The guy wound up getting arrested after the fact, but the only reason we were able to bring the federal charge was because that original police officer, that tribal police officer, had a modicum of federal deputization. So that's likely what happened here. I don't know, but I highly doubt that feds were on scene at the perimeter. I was called out because it was on a reservation and because the feds have jurisdiction out there. Really what wound up happening here was they got their bad guy and they wanted to make sure that he went away for a long time. So they said, hey, feds, can you come in and make that happen for us? That's a good thing. But the bad thing is when you don't give credit to the police department for winding up grabbing our bad guy here. All right, let's go over now to Las Cruces, New Mexico. The District of New Mexico. Las Cruces, the former stomping grounds of my good buddy, Kyle Seraphin. Headline, Las Cruces man sentenced for meth and fentanyl possession. So drug possession seems pretty simple. Bad guy here. This happened in May of 2024. His name is Guillermo Yanez. I know I butchered that, but apologies to our drug dealer, not so much. Mr. Yanez was arrested by Las Cruces Police Department. That's the first thing it says. Las Cruces Police Department officers attempted to arrest Yanez on an outstanding warrant. The warrant was out of Texas. So here we are in the old days where I guess there was the bad guys could flee across state lines, and there was a need then to have a federal authority come in because Bonnie and Clyde were going from Texas to Oklahoma, and we can't really have a posse chasing them down and executing them. That seems like vigilantism. So what we're going to do is have a federal nexus when people cross state lines, and ergo, we have Las Cruces Police Department attempting to arrest a bad guy on an outstanding warrant out of a different state. So a state authority here. Seems like we've grown, we've progressed. The states cooperate with each other. They have that capability that they didn't have during the Bonnie and Clyde days. Now, our bad guy, he ran away. He jumped over a wall at an apartment complex. During the chase, they saw him reach into his waistband, and he wound up just chucking his contraband because he didn't want to get caught with it. They wound up catching him out of a foot chase, and then they looked at what he had thrown on the ground, and lo and behold, it was meth and fentanyl. So, foot pursuit by, I'll call him again, Just Patrol, identified the bad guy, chased him down, and then went back and walked the pursuit scene and examined and found and secured the evidence that was necessary. And we still have the feds. Why are they missing? Because that's not their job. What's stopping those police officers from either arranging for our bad guy to be brought back to Texas on his outstanding warrant or to bring their own charges that they have there? What's stopping them from walking into the District of New Mexico, talking to a federal prosecutor and explaining the situation and sort of choosing the route that they wanted to pursue in order to prosecute it? That didn't happen here. What winds up happening is that the FBI, Albuquerque, takes credit, says, you're welcome. We're letting good cops be cops here because they wear the FBI badge and they're going and addressing a drug dealer. Nope, not involved at all. All right, let's go to Kansas now. District of Kansas. Headline is El Dorado man sentenced for child pornography distribution. So back again to the child exploitation, which is a violent crime. I know that it's sort of designated to be different because it's cyber-ish in quality. This is a violent crime. You can't ever convince me anything else otherwise. I don't care if you are just possessing the material and not putting your hands on the kid. At some point, somebody harmed a child. That's violent. Now, out of the FBI Kansas City office, and now the Department of Justice for that jurisdiction, bad guy's name is David Follett. On multiple occasions, he used his computer to share child pornography with other users in a peer-to-peer file sharing network. Among the recipients was an agent from Homeland Security Investigations, because HSI, which is the investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security, they have a fairly robust child exploitation operation that goes on. They have these sort of fusion centers, quasi public private partnerships that go on. There's offices that actually have acquaintances and buddies that work. They work on child sexual abuse material, and people make private donations to these offices to buy them more equipment, actually pay some of the salaries because people believe in it. Homeland Security is 10 times the size, budgetary wise, of the FBI. They have an 1811, a criminal investigator aspect to it. That is Homeland Security Investigations, HSI. And one of the big things that they address, that's actually in their prime directive, if you look at who is responsible for it, is child sexual abuse material. And here, the HSI agent, officer, undercover, whoever it was, wound up engaging in this conversation with this bad guy, David Follett, and David Follett sends the child porn to him. So now he's done. It's ones and zeros. He can't deny it. They've got him. We don't even give HSI the credit. The FBI takes the credit. They say we did that. Stealing credit. Status quo is the status quo. In fact, I know they took the credit for it because I actually went and dug up, and it's been since August, so it's not too long ago. Here is the post that you see from the FBI Kansas City handle. More than 10 years in federal prison for man who admitted to sharing child sexual abuse material, thanks to HSI Kansas City and United States Attorney's Office Kansas for their partnership on this case. You mean doing the entire thing? Allowing you to post on social media about it? That's basically the extent of what you did here. Homeland Security did all of it. I don't know why you're entitled to take credit. And here's another one where they take credit on their X handles. This comes from FBI New Haven's X account. And this one's a doozy because it is 3 separate cases where they are taking credit and very proud of all the work that they did. Although, let cops be cops. So for those who are not watching us over on rumble.com/amradpod or on YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast, you should go over there anyway and give us a nice like after the fact if you happen to be listening to us. But this is what FBI New Haven puts out. They're updates, news updates, 3 of them. First one is that a Waterbury armed drug trafficker was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Another one is that a jury convicted a man who threatened violence on Yale's campus. And the third one is that a New York man made numerous threatening communications. He was sentenced. So I had to go to each separate one to find out the details about them, and they are delicious. So let's go to the first one, and this is for this armed drug trafficker, sentenced to 10 years in prison. The bad guy here, his name is Elvin Santos, and a couple of notes here about the dates. The first one's from March of 2021, during the first 3 months of the Biden administration. Waterbury police saw our bad guy conducting what appeared to be hand-to-hand drug transactions. Just patrol, maybe some investigators, maybe some narco investigators, agents. Law enforcement apprehended him and 2 others and searched his car. They found some loaded handguns and some scales and ammo and fentanyl and cocaine. So good pop by the Waterbury police in March of 2021. A couple months later, they obtained, the locals, Waterbury police, got a state search warrant, and they wound up going and searching Santos, his house, and they found more drugs and more ammunition and more guns and scales, a bunch of bags. So it basically tied him up as a drug dealer at this point. This is in March, leading to a June search warrant from state authorities, 2021. A year later, May of 2022, I guess they're not doing a good job of keeping this guy locked up, but Waterbury police obtained a state search warrant, and they continued to investigate him for his narcotics trafficking. And they went and they wound up getting more drugs and more guns and more cash. You would think at this point they had their man, and they did, because from the press release, it says at the very, very bottom a note that Mr. Santos has been detained since June of 2022. That means he's been in state custody for 3.5 years. And after the fact, the feds came in and convicted him of a federal crime. So they didn't have to do any of the work outside of drafting the complaint affidavits based wholly and entirely on state investigative work and all the paperwork that they had. But, they get the credit for it and make sure that they announce that they did the sentencing of this drug trafficker, even though not a one of them was involved in actually doing the investigation. Second one, and again, we'll back to the X post from the FBI New Haven office. This was for a threat of violence on Yale's campus. Was this some sort of Hamas thing? I mean, maybe. No, it was way before that. Come on, nothing happens that fast. Bad guy Elijah White, he, I'm sorry, no, it's a different one. Mandel Bedone. He was incarcerated in state custody in April of 2022, 3.5 years ago. He's a crazy person. He winds up in state custody sending some weird mailings. He started talking about the Yale New Haven Incorporated, and he said that they did clinical trials on him, probably put some sort of like laser beam in his head, and he filed a lawsuit. It was immediately dismissed because it was frivolous and nonsensical, and crazy people do crazy things while they're in state custody. He's been locked up this entire time. And then a year later, because he's still in custody, because he's a crazy person, he emailed somebody else what they deemed to be a threat to the court. And the quote was, "If the district court dismisses this case or loses any one of the pages of this complaint, Mandel Bedone," he speaks to himself in the third person, "will purchase an illegal firearm and discharge it on Yale's campus, aiming for the students and staff until he is gunned down." So crazy person with some suicidal thoughts who hangs himself by his own petard because he makes threats and sends it to the authorities who are capable of locking him up. And you should know also that the U.S. Marshals did the full investigation. He's been in custody. They could have easily brought the charges, but U.S. Marshals didn't want to, so they handed it off to the FBI, and the FBI can then claim that they got a conviction for the guy who threatened violence at Yale. Am I saying he shouldn't have been charged? No, I'm saying he should probably be in an asylum. He's a crazy person. These threats were not real. Now, the last one. This one is, you get half credit, maybe. So we're 0 for 2. If you go 1 for 3, you might wind yourself up on the all-star team if you're playing baseball and not getting indicted for cheating. But can they go 1 for 3? This one is out, again, of the FBI New Haven office, and the headline from the District of Connecticut is that a New York man made numerous threatening communications, and he was sentenced. This is Elijah White. So between August and October of 2023, over 2 years ago, Elijah White sent over 1,000 text messages and called over 70 times and left threatening voicemails to this person in Connecticut. He's been detained, though, since November. So in a 3-month span, he sent thousands of text messages, made all these threatening phone calls, left some threatening voicemails, and he was detained by local authorities. And then it took them 2 years to get him convicted. Okay, well, in fact, if the feds did actually investigate this as interstate threats, that's a federal crime. That seems appropriate. What were they able to get him sentenced for? Because the headline says that he was sentenced, and we know that our federal law enforcement agencies and the Department of Justice, they love to get themselves credit for how long they get people sentenced. They love it so much that they don't even tell you the number of years normally. They tell you months because it's a bigger number. But they just say he's sentenced, which got me thinking, what was the sentence? Oh, he got probation, 5 years. It's just slap on the wrist. Well, that's well done. That's awesome. So he can just go out and maybe drive over state lines and actually go and inflict physical violence against the person who he threatened over 1,000 times via text message. So half credit. You're batting under the Mendoza line. Well done, feds. Back to the District of New Mexico, Albuquerque again. We can dig this one up, and this was a violent retail robbery spree. It's not that big. Our bad guy here from the FBI Albuquerque office, his name is Demetrius Bailey, and between July and September in 2023, he and an accomplice committed a series of armed robberies. They showed a BB gun and a toy gun in one instance, which is still a crime. All it needs is the victim to have a perception that's a real weapon and it's armed, so that's appropriate. And they actually had a real handgun and threatened an employee in a security while stealing electronics and cell phones on another occasion. And at the time of his arrest in 2023, Mr. Bailey was a repeat violent offender with prior armed robbery convictions. So he's a convicted felon. He's not supposed to have a gun. So we got him, right? There's more to the story, though. Now, I went over to NewMexicoReports.org. 2023's most prolific felony shoplifting cases. And it is mentioned here the total amount of money that Mr. Bailey stole, the value was about $15,000. And the little detail, a warrant was issued for Bailey's arrest on October 23rd, 2023, and he was arrested the same day. Prosecutors asked for him to be held pending trial, and that motion was granted. The arrest warrant was by local authorities. He was arrested by the police based on a state arrest warrant for his state offenses, and he's been in custody for over 2 years. But because he's a convicted felon, it constitutes a federal felony, a felon in possession of a firearm. So now that the danger's all gone, now that the investigation is all sewn up, now the feds can roll in after the fact and make sure that they give themselves lots of credit for stopping this evil, diabolical, vicious, how was it characterized? Felony shoplifter. Let's let cops be cops. They're certainly doing a great job, aren't they? Okay, now we can go over to FBI Sacramento. We're churning and burning through these guys on the American Radicals podcast, and I think we're through maybe half the ones I got so far. So, FBI Sacramento, and I think I have 2 from them. We'll first go to their news alert, which they put out on their X account, and it says that, quote, "We are proud to have made significant investigative contributions," language, investigative contributions. So they were there, kind of, maybe, sort of. We'll have to find out. To a collaborative investigation. We were there too. Fredo, I'm smart. It resulted in significant charges against high ranking members of the United Cartels, announced yesterday by the Department of Justice. The language here is delicious. We'll go back to it, but first let me show you what the actual public affairs for the Department of Justice put out there. It's not specific to any United States Attorney's Office. This comes from the Department of Justice's main site. Headline: Justice Department charges 5 senior leaders of the United Cartels, a designated foreign terrorist organization. And this is the effort now under the Donald Trump administration to designate many of these drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. It's a little bit dubious. I have some concerns about it, not because I want to defend the drug cartels, but because I can see some downstream consequences that's going to evolve. I mean, arguably, if you happen to be a street level user of narcotics and you purchase it, you are providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. Should we send you to Gitmo? Or is the national security apparatus going to look to work smarter and not harder and then just arrest drug users as terrorist sympathizers? I could definitely see that being a thing. But I had to read through this, and I'll throw it up again, and I'd like to keep them generally pretty immobile, but it is worth the visual here for those watching on Rumble and YouTube for me to just to gently scroll down so you can see this long, detailed, hundreds of words write up about charging this foreign terrorist organization known as United Cartel. I had to read through all of it in order to get what I really wanted, and that was, what happened to these guys? Well, you'll be stunned. They're all still fugitives from the law because they don't reside in America. So years and untold treasure was spent to secure. How was it characterized over by FBI Sacramento? It was a significant investigative contribution on behalf of the FBI in a collaborative investigation to get significant charges. So we've used investigation twice and the word significant twice. Apparently they don't have a thesaurus over at FBI Sacramento's social media team. Significant charges that they'll never actually realize because these guys live in Mexico and they're drug kingpins and will never be held accountable because Mexico is a narco trafficking terrorist state and there will never be any justice. But it didn't stop the Department of Justice and the FBI from giving high fives and backslaps and helmet stickers and promoting on career cases because they, after all, had a significant role in this collaborative investigative effort. And we can stay over in California for this next one, the Eastern District of California, press release coming from the United States Attorney's Office there. And this is Davis Picnic Day shooter indicted for being a felon in possession of a firearm. So this guy winds up going and shooting up a picnic, which is not good, but we didn't get all the details. So what are the details that we got on Mr. Joseph Davis? Police officers began investigating Joseph Davis after determining that he was a shooter in April of 2025 at the Rainbow City Park in Davis. So our bad guy's name is Davis, and it happened in Davis. That just happened to be a coincidence. But the shooter here was investigated by, as they put it in the press release, police officers. This guy goes and shoots up a picnic. Law enforcement officers, i.e. just patrol or detectives, local officials, conducted a search of Joseph Davis's apartment, which means that they actually wrote a search warrant at a local level in order to do it, and they seized a short barrel AR-15, and he's a prohibited person. He's not allowed to actually have it. So that's where the feds come in. And the adjoining piece, the sister piece, where I did a little bit more details, coming from KCRA.com. Headline: Suspected Davis Picnic Day shooter faces federal gun charges, the DOJ says. And here's the statement. Quote, the Davis Police Department said that Davis was arrested in Sacramento County May 23rd after a search warrant was issued for his apartment, where an illegal assault rifle was found. So he was arrested by the Davis Police Department in May of 2023, and yet we get a nice press release in August of 2025. Taking credit. You're welcome, America. Aren't you glad you have a robust $11 billion federal law enforcement apparatus, which is prioritizing violent crime, even though the violent crime happened years before it was prioritized? They got to make sure they get that headline, though, so you can be deluded into thinking that they went after an active shooter that was happening this year when it was a 2-year-old case. All right, we can pivot now to Washington field office, which they love to play with the numbers. In Washington field office, because it exists, their area of responsibility for the FBI is in Washington, D.C. It's a unique jurisdiction. Everything there technically is a federal crime. It just comes down to whether or not you're going to charge it in the Superior Court or the District Court. Superior would be like local crime, even though it's federal. And district would be the federal crime, the higher sort of level that you would expect to be prosecuted, unless, of course, you're a grandma who walked through the Capitol on January 6th after a put-up job by a Capitol police officer who planted a pipe bomb in the area. But the Washington field office's X page is worth throwing up here before we get to the details of the case, because their note is that Washington, D.C. man was sentenced to, and I told you they love the months, 198 months in prison for his role in a series of store robberies. The press release, as they identify it, is that a gunman for 7 inside job robberies at Chinatown Walgreens was sentenced to 16 and a half years. See, 198 sounds way better than 16 and a half. So that's why they went with that on Twitter. Our bad guy's name is Kamanye Williams. Now, he and a store manager basically facilitated this. He winds up doing these armed robberies because he has an inside man. He tries to make it look like it's a robbery so that the inside man, the manager, helps him and lets him know how much cash they got, when would be a good time to do it, and they split the proceeds later. These happened in July of 2023, August of 2023, September of 2023, November of 2023, December of 2023, January and February 2024. Years and years ago. In total, these guys stole about $29,000 from the Walgreens, and the robberies stopped, you will note, when Williams was shot in the chest. Was he shot by his co-conspirator who wanted to keep all the $29,000? Well, no. He was shot by a special police officer, basically an off-duty cop who was working security. Guy comes in to go do the robbery, and the security officer shoots him in the chest because it's a deadly force situation. And then he was apprehended by DC's Metropolitan Police Department. But even though it's been a couple of years, they're hoping that you're going to forget. The FBI is addressing violent crime now. They stopped this guy. He did 7 inside job robberies. That's violent crime. We're on it. We got him sentenced now for 198 months, 16 years. Not saying he shouldn't go to prison. I'm saying the people that put him there should get the credit, and the guy that put a round in his chest definitely deserves the credit. And it should be more than just a throwaway line at the bottom of a press release by the Department of Justice. He should probably be getting a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Back to Connecticut, because FBI New Haven has been taking the place lately, I've noticed, of what FBI Boston used to do, and that is taking credit for things that they didn't do. I guess Boston must have caught wind of what I was doing here on the AMRAD pod because I was using them a lot. Sorry again, George Hill. The District of Connecticut. Hartford man convicted of firearms offenses, and we're back to it. If you commit a crime and you happen to have a gun, the feds love to go jam you up for that. Again, they'll get you jammed up after the whole thing's been solved. And this one involves a guy whose name is Morris Carter. He was involved in a fight at a convenience store in Hartford. Surveillance footage showed that he was in possession of a firearm and he was beating a convenience store patron in the head with the magazine for the firearm. So he was fighting with the guy, didn't want to shoot him, just wanted to beat him down with the magazine. He then ran away. He drove away. He threw 2 handguns out of his window. And then Wethersfield police stopped the car, just patrol, found a loaded magazine under the seat because they did a lawful search. And later, a local resident called the FBI. No, she called the local police because she found one of the guns this guy chucked out the window. And this all happened February 2023. But in August of 2025, we got our conviction. And that means in 4, 6, 8, 12 months, we'll get another press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the District of Connecticut, when they get this guy sentenced for being a felon in possession. And when then will we hear about the Wethersfield Police Department doing good old-fashioned police work? Just letting cops be cops. We won't. Stealing credit. Okay, now it's time to throw some shade over at FBI Boston. Now, FBI Boston has a couple of different United States Attorney's offices that they liaise with. This one is in Rhode Island. Now, the headline here is that Rhode Island businessman convicted a second time on tax charges. Well, that's not violent crime, but it is federal crime. And as long as we're going to be prioritizing violent crime, my question is, who's addressing the mandate to look into white collar and public corruption? Could that be something that we shelve or maybe we hand off to another department or agency? Maybe something like the IRS. Well, actually, we probably should go with the IRS because according to this press release, again, from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Rhode Island, a bad guy's name is William LaRupa, or La Europa. I don't know. We'll call him Tax Cheat William. Tax Cheat Bill. The IRS determined that Tax Cheat Bill manipulated his finances, and they investigated it, and it wound up being he was hiding some personal expenses. There was a motorcycle and a $100,000 discharge of debt. I mean, it's very nerdy IRS type stuff. So the IRS investigated this guy entirely and found out that Tax Cheat Bill was not paying all of his taxes that he owed to Uncle Sam. And then, I don't know, the FBI found out about it and took credit. So good job. Well done, FBI Boston, for stealing credit from the IRS. Pivot over now to the District of Nevada, Las Vegas division for the FBI. July of this year. So now we're dealing with the current Trump administration, the current Department of Justice, the current FBI, as they're all presently constituted under the leadership of Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, bad guy Devonte Jackson. He brandished a black handgun and stole over $300,000 from an armored truck. So that's bank robbery, essentially. That's why the feds can get involved. Now, later, he was arrested by the FBI, by the U.S. Marshal Service because they had a warrant for him? Nope. Mr. Jackson was arrested by Texas state troopers in Centerville, Texas. He was extradited back to Las Vegas. So now we're back to the Bonnie and Clyde thing. It is a federal crime. Not saying that shouldn't be charged federally. And the feds were necessary back in the Bonnie and Clyde days of bringing together the different agencies and different personnel, or even just being the oversight of it, or they themselves going across state lines because they had the authority to do that. They had that big boy federal power. That didn't happen here because Texas can liaise with Nevada pretty well. And they found out, hey, there's this guy, he's doing armored car robberies. We think for one reason or another, he might be in Texas. And then the Texas state troopers went out and said, well, I'm your Huckleberry. Let's let cops be cops. And they went and did it. And then they extradited him back to Nevada. Nice partnership between different state authorities there. And the feds have their man, even though they weren't there to interdict the armed robbery and they weren't there to scoop him up. They will be there after the fact because now they can claim that they got him indicted, which means that he's already in custody. And then they indicted him after the fact. And they'll also be able to claim that he's been convicted. And they'll also be able to claim that he's been sentenced and give themselves all the credit for all those statistical accomplishments and say, "You're welcome, America. We're doing the Lord's work here of combating violent crime because we're just cops being cops." We can now go back to Washington field office. And this one, again, is going to be from their X profile. And then I have the adjoining Department of Justice press release. The headline is that a Washington, D.C. man is sentenced to 108 months in prison for his role of a spree of carjackings and robberies. Now, this spree was noted here by the District of Columbia, the worst named United States Attorney's Office in America. Spree of carjackings, armed robberies results in a 108-month prison sentence. Now, they have details about each one of these. They're only relevant to the fact that the dates are worth noting. Our bad guy here, Andre Rushing, he did armed carjackings in March 2023, in March 6th, 7th, 16th, 17th, 26th, and 30th. All of these happened in March of 2023. And now we've gotten to the sentencing part, which means that he was arrested, he was indicted, he was convicted, and now he's sentenced. Now, from the last one, it's worth kind of giving a little bit of details of this guy, Andre Rushing, and I can bring down the press release. Andre Rushing, he like jacked one car, and then he became stuck in traffic. And then while he was driving, he crashed several cars trying to get away from it. He winds up crashing into a police car because the police were pursuing him. Fairfax County Police Department. So the Fairfax County Police Department winds up arresting Andre Rushing. He was doing all these prior carjackings in Maryland, so he's crossing state lines. It's in the general DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia. The Fairfax Police Department arrests him, but because he's done the carjackings in Maryland, he's probably got some outstanding warrants there, or they were at least able to tie him to those. So then now that he's in the custody of the Fairfax Police Department, it says in the press release, quote, FBI and United States Marshal Service took Rushing into custody before handing him over to the Fairfax County Police Department. So the feds came in and took custody of our bad guy from Fairfax County Police Department. And then they handed him back to the exact same police department because they had to make sure that he was in their custody for an amount of time so they could claim that they arrested him and then hand him back over for local authority charges. Congratulations. Why was that entire transaction necessary? To justify existences, to get some headlines, to get some attaboys, get some congratulations, which they were very, very happy to do. And I know that they did that because I actually found a local news, WTOP News headline: Fairfax police arrest 3 men after armed carjacking. At least the local news didn't fall for the scheme that was pushed out here. The feds did a darn thing related to it. All right, I've got one more, and then we'll give an assessment and some recommendations. This one comes from my old stomping grounds at FBI Jacksonville, United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Florida. Headline is that a Gainesville man was sentenced to over 35 years in prison for drug trafficking, a firearm, and machine gun offenses. His name is Legarius Johnson. It says very, very specifically, law enforcement conducted surveillance due to reports that Johnson and others were in possession of firearms, including a machine gun. So local cops went out there and were like, hey, this guy might have a machine gun. He might be dangerous. And he's got a prior criminal history, convicted felon. That's against the law. Officers identified Johnson and tried to approach him, but Johnson spun around, pointed his hand inside his jacket pocket, which is a furtive movement, which could wind up getting you shot by cops, just so you know. And officers thought that he was going to shoot at them. Officers identified themselves. He ran. Officers were able to chase him down on foot and got him with a police canine, a land shark. So they deployed the canine to wind up doing a bite on this guy and got him into custody. Local cops, just being cops, just patrol, responding to a call for service. Somebody calls 911, says, hey, there's this guy. I think he has a machine gun. I know he's a convicted felon. And the boys in blue show up, do their job, identify him, put themselves in harm's way, voluntarily so. Guy made a furtive movement, and then they got him into custody. But because it's a felon in possession of a firearm. There's a federal nexus to us. And the FBI Jacksonville comes in now that the danger's all gone. Now that the guy has been in custody this entire time, they're able to say that they got him into prison for 35 years. You're welcome, America. Well done. So that is a churning and a burning. If I've ever done one before on some of these cases, these press releases, I've had a bunch of them in reserve for a while. I want to make sure that I put them out there. And again, I'm not really interested in dunking on FBI so much as I want to optimize what we're doing. So some takeaways here, some recommendations. If we are indeed prioritizing violent crime, no problem with that. But there's a better way of doing it, because most FBI personnel and agents aren't law enforcement. They aren't cops. Their job description isn't cops. They're criminal investigators. They're supposed to put the pieces together after the fact. They're supposed to do it in a way that is complex and long lasting because they have the funding, they have the patience to do it. It's normally attributed to public corruption and white collar. So now you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole by taking those people who have that subject matter expertise and experience and saying, bring that to address violent crime, which needs to be addressed quickly. So what you wind up doing is taking those people and attaching them to local cops and getting in the way. It's just not what they know how to do. If you work drugs, I wouldn't throw you onto a child pornography squad. It's just not what you would do. You'd have to be brought up to speed. That would take time. So since that doesn't work, they have to work smarter, not harder. And they just find these cases and these instances of letting cops be cops. The boys in blue show up, make their arrest. Sometimes local detectives do the investigation. And then you just find a way to put yourself in there. Find a federal nexus so you can say, oh, well, we'll take credit for that. And that isn't doing what the American people want. That's not really addressing violent crime because it's already been addressed at that point. There's an opportunity cost. The time you're spending taking credit for what other people did, you could have been doing other measures against violent crime, or you could have been doing white collar work, public corruption work. There's an opportunity cost, and it also creates that friction. So this is a suboptimal way of doing it. If we want to be more optimized, we want to actually use the resources we have, the $11 billion going to an FBI, I think we can get a chunk of that away and give it where it would be better spent. Block grants to local police departments, sheriff's offices, state police, tribal police, what have you. All these agencies, which are the first responders that are really interfacing with violent crime most often. What about if we take and shave off some of the funding from the FBI and just give it to the cops so they can go do the cop things? We could pay for overtime. We could pay for more cops. We could pay for training and equipment. So the cops that know how to do their job will have everything that they need, or at least more of what they need in order to address violent crime. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't assist beyond the funding. There's a scientific and technological prowess that exists in federal law enforcement. Hey, we need to track this cell phone. Send it off. Hey, can we get a rush on this DNA check? Yeah, we can do that. Hey, we need to check the travel records. We need to look at what this guy's been able to do because he's going state to state. Hey, we can do all of that. We don't have to be armed to do that. We can expedite it. We can be really focused on those violent crimes and assisting the local partners. I think that makes a lot more sense. And similarly, as it comes to prosecutions, you have county prosecutor, and then you have a federal prosecutor. And I've said it over and over again. What is stopping the local guys from going, not all the time, to a county prosecutor? Why can't they just walk into the federal prosecutor's office and say, hey, I think we have a federal crime here? If we needed to deputize them, we could, or we could just have a U.S. Marshal who was there in order to do it, or we could assign some federal investigators specifically to United States attorneys' offices. Instead of making them FBI agents, we could make them United States attorneys' agents. And that would be kind of interesting because you might have experienced investigators who want to do things federally. We could have them apply to their local jurisdiction. They wouldn't have to be relocated like I was, going from Georgia to Iowa to Florida, because we want to avoid any sort of insinuation that you could have a conflict of interest. Well, I do have an interest in my local community. Why couldn't I apply to be a federal investigator using the skill set that I had with a local United States attorney's office? We could help them. And that could be an interface between a federal prosecutor's office and a local police department's criminal investigation division. Also, there are things called SAUSAs, SAUSA. Now, a special United States attorney, as opposed to an assistant United States attorney, is typically somebody who's not hired on full-time permanently to be an assistant United States attorney. An assistant United States attorney is the front line. They're the prosecutors at the federal level. The United States attorney doesn't go to court and argue cases normally, unless it's like John Gotti. But you have special assistant United States attorneys. They're local guys. They work off of grants, and the grant will be for 12 months. And they are incredibly incentivized to take cases federally, because if they don't show the results, they'll lose the grant. They're incentivized to actually take state cases off of the plate, off of the burden of the county prosecutor, take it to the federal if they can, so we can come down with a hammer. I see no reason why we couldn't do that. Why couldn't we give that authority to county prosecutors so that they could choose their own adventure? They don't need to actually physically be inside a United States attorney's office. If you're an experienced litigator as a county prosecutor, I mean, there might be some form that you need to know, and you might need to know some of the etiquette that exists in a federal courtroom that might be different from the local courtroom, but that could be on-the-job training. Why wouldn't we enable one or two county prosecutors to also be special assistant United States attorneys? Therefore, when they're typically interacting with detectives from a police department who come in and say, hey, we got this robbery case, we want to prosecute it. Well, let's call in the special assistant United States attorney. They can determine whether or not they want to take this locally or take it federally. And spoiler, they're going to want to take it federally because they want to get that grant. They want to keep doing that federal work. All these seem to be ways that we could more optimize our prioritization of violent crime. And I think that they would be better served at doing it rather than, as I've highlighted here and throughout multiple shows in the past on the AMRAD pod, about these press releases where we just come in and swoop in after the fact, after all the danger's gone, after all the investigations are done, and we just take credit. Because the nature of anybody, and it's not unique to feds, but it definitely is very prolific, is to work smarter and not harder. And they've done that here. They're incentivized to justify their existence. It's also a problem that you have with task forces, where you have a federal task force that has all the goodies and all the funding and the tools and the access to federal prosecutors. And everybody wants to stay on that task force. So what are we going to do? Well, you would think you'd start a task force for a specific task. Like, we have this bad guy doing this bad thing. Let's get a lot of people in the room to address it. And once it's done, once this guy's in handcuffs, then we just end the task force. But now they're permanent. So we have to justify our existence. So our task isn't to deal with Bonnie and Clyde. Our task is to deal with violent crime. Well, let's look for some violent crime. Well, do we really want to do a complex violent crime investigation that could take years? We might not have the funding next year. Let's just find the local dirtbag who will be really easy, and we'll just drag it out for 10 or 11 months. And then afterwards, we'll claim that we got a really big takedown when it didn't impact the community to the very least. We're trying to prioritize what are the highest demand of the American people of its law enforcement. The American people expressed that a year ago. They want violent crime addressed. That's not to say there isn't other crime out there. Maybe we could farm out the public corruption, the white collar, over to IRS, to the U.S. Postal Service, the United States Marshal's Office, or we just keep it with the FBI. And they focus their people, their special agents, their criminal investigators, their intel analysts, support staff on those matters. But when it comes to violent crime, let's let cops be cops to the best that they can. And I think that the way we can do it is by directing the resources in a more optimal fashion. So those are my recommendations. Take them for what they're worth. They are, after all, coming from a hobbyist podcaster, not representing any particular department, agency, arm, the federal government of the United States of America. Just an American expressing his First Amendment right to share his opinion on things that are open source and having a unique opinion on them because of my background. All right, we have reached the end, and I'm going to leave you with a nice biblical worldview here on the AMRAD pod, and also with a nice palate cleanse. So we're going to go to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. That's a cop verse. I gave 18 different examples of cops being cops. They deserve all the credit, and they should definitely get it enhanced as opposed to having their work stolen by the feds. And to today's palate cleanse, which I don't know, again, it's so hard to tell if these are artificial intelligence or not. But the peacemakers, they want to be the sheepdogs that are protecting the flock against the wolves that are out there. What about the real dogs that are out there that might be protecting some of the most vulnerable? And those would be the babies. Here are some examples of dogs saving babies' lives. If it happened or not, it's debatable. Again, artificial intelligence, but nonetheless is entertaining.
Milo, drop it! What are you? Oh my gosh! I'm way down. Oh my God! Come here, baby Ranger! Inside, Ranger! Inside, come here! Oh my God! Go get in the house now! Max, back! Come on!
Not a dog lover, but if you do have one that fights a grizzly bear or a jaguar or a hawk, good on you. Congratulations. You got to keep her there. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the AMRAD pod. Back with you Saturday for the grab bag, 10:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/AMRAD pod and on YouTube, the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe, do all the things. Hope you have a good day. And until the next time, enjoy it out there. Be safe. Be blessed. See you later.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/AMRADPod.